to the Indaba. This is the first one of the year, so Happy New Year, a bit belated. So today we're going to be talking about theming. So I just want to say that I know that there is a broad diversity of opinions on how styles and theming should occur. And so I just want to remind folks that join and ask questions to that we're all on the same side, and that is free and open source software. So let's have good, meaningful discussions. And with that, I would like to introduce Cassidy and Paul. So we have Cassidy here from Elementary and Paul from Yaru to talk about kind of some of the things they've been doing. And we have Britt, our community liaison as well, also Gnome person. And so anyways, Cassidy, you want to take it and tell us a little bit about who you are, and then Paul can do the same, and we can kind of dive into some like tech stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Cassidy James from Elementary, so co-founder and a UX architect at Elementary OS. If you haven't heard of Elementary OS, check it out at elementary.io. But it's a free and open source operating system, and it's built on Ubuntu, on an Ubuntu core. So we use the Ubuntu repositories. But the user interface has been designed and developed by Elementary to provide a cohesive experience for our users. And yeah, I guess I'm a UX architect, so I do a lot of UX design type stuff. I also am pretty involved in the Gnome community, working on initiatives like GTK and some of the Adwaita stuff as well.
Cool. Paul, tell us a little bit like from Yaru, what's your role there?
Okay. Hi, I'm Paul. I'm part of the Yaru team. I'm a big fan of Ubuntu. I'm mostly doing icons and theming stuff in Yaru.
Yeah.
I'm also doing telephone.
Yeah, it happens.
And that's it.
Yeah, so actually a personal thread here. I worked on LibreOffice, and Paul did some really beautiful LibreOffice icons for Yaru. And yeah, so thank you very much for that. Yeah, so gosh, where do we start? Like Cassidy, I know you guys in Elementary, I say guys, I shouldn't say that. You folks at Elementary have been updating some style sheets for GTK4.
Yep.
And I know that Adwaita has gone through some changes like libadwaita. Can you talk a little bit about how that fits with Elementary? Yeah, and what your contributions have been there.
Yeah, so I think the biggest things for us for the stack have been GTK4 has been out and is released and is available in the Ubuntu base that we're using for Elementary OS 7 for the next release. And with Flatpak, we're also able to use GTK4 in existing apps. So we're well on board with GTK4 with transitioning our stuff there. And with that, so libadwaita is kind of different. And also I see your cat. They are still in the show, which I love. So yay. The big thing for us with libadwaita is it replaces what we were already using, which was libhandy, which is was developed out of like Purism's initiatives for mobile adaptive apps. But Elementary OS isn't mobile, so it's like, why would we use a mobile library? For us, the big thing is it just does a lot of modern like app widget patterns that we would expect coming from mobile app development, and also things like multi-touch. Like that's probably the biggest place we use it in Elementary OS is you can 2-finger swipe to go back anytime you're in like a kind of a linear view. You can swipe to go back. So libadwaita was born kind of out of libhandy for a GTK4 world. And so we're using libadwaita in a lot of our apps. It simplifies a lot of things for us. A lot of repetition that we would have to do ourselves is now handled by libadwaita. And there's no issues using like the Elementary style sheet because we have a different visual style than upstream Gnome does. You can use those components of libadwaita without like having to use all of libadwaita, and that's fine, and that's been really great for us. So yeah, I don't know how like into the weeds I want to get with the GTK4 stuff.
But Elementary kind of already had essentially like a shared library there for for that visual language, and it was
right. Yeah, so Granite is Elementary's library of GTK widgets and utilities, and that's actually been a huge effort now with the GTK4 port. It's given us an opportunity to really look at like deprecating a lot of the old stuff, the old code that had been around that GTK just has built in now, or that libadwaita has built in that we can use. An example of that is like tabs. So in Elementary OS, we have a really consistent tab pattern. They're like notebook tabs, like what you would see in a web browser or a code editor. And libadwaita has these really nice new tabs that are like way better than ours were. There's animations, and there's like you can pop them out from the window to pop into a new window, and like they're really awesome.
Yeah.
I think Alex, forget his last name off the top of my head, but he's been like doing awesome work for on libadwaita and previously on libhandy. So, and we've been really working with him really closely to say, hey, let's make sure this works for Elementary OS. So we've actually been like deprecating a lot of our Granite stuff in favor of the libadwaita stuff and just core GTK stuff, which has been really like deleted code is like the best code in a lot of ways. When you don't have to maintain the stuff all by yourself anymore, when the bigger open source community is maintaining this, that's better for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, can you talk a little bit about from the Yaru side, what kind of changes have come about as libadwaita was released? So I guess I should have started and told people that weren't familiar that Adwaita is like the visual language of Gnome, and then libadwaita is kind of like we're moving to the shared library so that GTK and Gnome can kind of grow separately. So with that in mind, Paul, I know that like our Yaru icons, Yaru is like our default theme in Ubuntu, and that's based on Adwaita. Like, how has that changed? What kind of challenges have you seen there? And like, have you been working with upstream to, I don't know, if you need to, like, yeah, talk a little bit about from the Yaru side, what that work has been like.
As with libadwaita, we can't use the Yaru style sheet for styling the window. We're trying to improve the global consistency with GTK3 and Gnome shell. We're trying to fit the Adwaita like a border radius.
Would you say that
only one?
has
only
it been
one
difficult, or is it fairly streamlined? Like, is it challenging to change all those things, or
no? It's just that as we can't use your own styling, we are trying to create to fix the GTK3 looks to fit with libadwaita looking, so it looks all the same. For example, switch and slide. We're trying to fit the libadwaita looks in GTK4 3. Sorry. And recently we moved to border radius of Adwaita, so it looks consistent across the desktop.
Very nice. I had a question. I just lost it. Yeah. So, actually, so how is this, or how would that work with like apps that are still kind of GTK3 based, like GIMP? Would that? So when GNOME 42 comes out, and how is that going to look? Does anybody know? Can somebody tell me?
When GIMP 3 version will release, it will look like libadwaita, as Yaru is trying to fit libadwaita looks for GTK3. It's not perfect, but we are trying to have a consistent look across GTK4, libadwaita, and GTK3. Just maybe GTK3 will have some more tweaks like green accent buttons, because we cannot do that in libadwaita. But we keep that in Gnome shell and GTK3.
Okay. How here's a very basic question. How is the Yaru theme styled? Like, how are the colors changed? Is it like changed? Are we just forking Adwaita or I don't know, forking, like we're copying Adwaita and then like we're hard coding those values, those color values into the CSS, or are they like passed as CSS variable, like the colors? Because I think you guys do that in elementary, right? You pass the colors as like variables.
So for the elementary style sheet, we do a few different things. The way we support accent colors throughout the whole OS is we actually just use Sass variables to build actually separate style sheets. So there's actually technically a separate style sheet for every accent color. And then we just change what style sheet is selected by the system to select each accent color. So it's not dynamic. You can't choose like a totally random accent color, but you can choose one of the like 8 or 10 that we have. But then in addition to that, apps can use GTK CSS variables to override those accent colors in their own apps. So that, if an app has orange as an accent color on elementary OS, but the system accent color is blue, it can still brand it the way it wants using GTK CSS variables. And I think that's similar to what Adwaita is doing. I don't think Adwaita technically supports like user selectable accent colors at this point, but I think they're working towards that.
Yeah.
And we'll probably kind of, similar to what we've seen with the dark style, we'll probably, like, we had an implementation first, and then Gnome or Adwaita might do it one way, and it's like probably technically better, and then so we'll probably just kind of align with them on whatever they end up doing.
Right.
Which is a fun relationship with like upstreams and downstreams of like, in ways we're downstream, but in ways we're upstream with some design ideas, but also it filters back upstream and then it's better. So I don't know. I just love that relationship.
Well, that's kind of a beautiful thing about open source, right?
Right.
Yeah. Does the Yaru team, Paul, do you know, does the Yaru team work so closely with upstream Gnome as well, or?
Personally, I don't push code to upstream. I don't have the time.
No, yeah. No,
Yaru is already taking a lot of time in my life.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But maybe if we style less GTK, I could try to. But actually, no.
Yeah.
I know Frederick does some upstream contribution.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen some of his comments on some of those PRs. Yeah. So I was doing some research yesterday, kind of on styles around Gnome to get my footing a little bit, and I was reading about this API that to recolor things, and I was wondering, Cassidy, if you happen to have like any sort of update on where we're at with that.
Yeah, so it was funny, actually. I forget who it was. Somebody just emailed me recently and was like, "Hey, like, can I get your input on this?" And I was like, "Oh man, got really into the weeds on the technical side." So personally, I don't typically work super deeply in the technical side, unless out of necessity.
Yeah.
As far as I know, that the recoloring API is similar to. I think it's trying to serve two needs, which is one, apps being able to recolor for branding reasons, for app consistency branding. So let's say if you had an official GTK Spotify app, they would probably want to use their Spotify green throughout the UI, right? Instead of Ubuntu or Yaru orange or purple or elementary blue or whatever, they probably want to use Spotify green. So that's part of what that recoloring API is, which again, today that can be done with GTK CSS variables. And I think that is supported in current Adwaita now as well. It wasn't previously in GTK 3, I don't believe, but I think in GTK 4 it is.
Yeah.
If it might not be merged, but I know I've seen some experiments at least, some screenshots of really cool recoloring that you can do.
Okay,
but then
nice.
the other side is the system-wide recoloring, which would be something that would serve like Ubuntu or Yaru, where you want to say, hey, system-wide, we would like all apps to, by default to have, I don't remember what accent colors you use right now, if it's orange or purple still, or if you're
No,
going to be...
we dropped purple. We only use orange because of libadwaita is only, we can have only one accent color, so we choose orange.
Right. Okay. So that's the other side of the recoloring API is distributions or operating systems or desktops being able to choose what the default accent color for all apps would be while still using Adwaita itself, which I don't think that is implemented at this point. And I think that's what's kind of still in discussions and prototyping. And I know folks from Pop! OS also have been interested in that sort of the aspect from it. But it's really hard to say, I want this operating system to have its complete own unique identity, but also share the entire style sheet with a completely different, look and feel. So that's kind of what they're trying to balance is, okay, how much of a theming API makes sense versus at what point do you say, well, just use a different style sheet, and apps can either opt in or opt out of that, or there's a whole bunch of discussion around that too.
Right. Yeah. I think that it's important for and then like, how do you deal with dark theme? So Spotify green, you do a system-wide dark theme. Is it a dark green now? Like, does Spotify okay with that?
Yeah, complex issue for sure. But we are seeing, like, with Gnome now supports an official like dark style preference, and Elementary OS supports the same one. So like we're seeing progress being made there. It's just it takes some time to like tackle all these issues and then actually kind of prove them in actual usage. I think the next big step with dark style is actually like getting like big apps like Firefox and Chrome and big apps that aren't necessarily like natively using GTK.
Right.
They can listen to that dark style as well, and they support dark style on other platforms.
Right.
So that's part of that next step. And so it's like with each step of this, you have to work like within your own little bubble and then like kind of grow the scope of work.
Yeah, I saw that you did a little bit of like a little bit of a survey a couple years ago on preferences, and I was really surprised that you came up with like 88% of people would prefer a dark theme. I was like, dang, I didn't realize that.
And that was like how many people use a dark style at least sometimes. And so I think that's the hard thing is like some people are like, oh, well, I don't use a dark style all the time, but it's like, well, yeah, at night on my phone I do. It's like, well, that means that feature is still important to you, even if 90% of the time you use a light style and then 10% of the time at night you use it. Like that still means that feature has value. And I think we've seen that with, people were really excited in Elementary OS when it came out, and people are excited about it being like finally officially supported in Gnome, and we're seeing apps adopt it. So those other big, Mac OS and Windows and Android, they all have it. So it's trying to close that gap a little bit on that front. And I really like seeing that. You're right, though. Like Firefox and Chromium, like don't always play perfectly well. Like some of the icons are just totally washed out. Give up on finding your GitHub tab, because black on black. But yeah, no, I think that's great. And so, okay, so I see that Spotify doesn't have a light theme anywhere, so I guess it just wouldn't change. Makes sense. But that does add to the complexity even more then, because it's like, okay, well now some apps are going to always be dark, so you can't just always change the accent color to be darker, like it's so complex.
Yeah, so you really, the challenge is like having this libadwaita, trying to guess all of the possible cases that it would have to or settle for a default and then like define like, what is that default? What should it be? That kind of thing. That's really interesting. So what kind of changes I'd like to hear a little bit about what we're going to expect in GNOME 42 with these changes. So yeah, maybe Paul, you can kick it off. Can you give us a little bit of a teaser of like what we can expect to see from Yaru with GNOME 42 when it's released in late March?
GNOME 42, we are trying to fit GNOME shell looks upstream. We're closer to upstream looks, but we get upstream change. We didn't do much change to GNOME shell in this release. Yeah, except border radius, we didn't do any change. The big change we will see in GNOME shell 42 is bigger padding. I think that's it.
I think I read something about like more rounded icons. Maybe that will come through the Yaru.
No, we didn't change icons. No.
Okay. What about from elementary? What kind of changes can we expect to see with GNOME 42?
Yeah, so it's kind of weird. So elementary OS doesn't use GNOME directly.
Right.
So the GNOME release cycle doesn't like directly affect us. But the biggest equivalent there, because yeah, we don't use GNOME shell, for example. So like there's some significant improvements to GNOME shell in GNOME 42. But for elementary OS, it's more about GTK4. So with this cycle, we are finally we're able to adopt GTK4 for some of our core apps, and then our third-party app developers can use GTK4 as well because it'll be part of our platform. So, and as far as that goes, the biggest thing for GTK4 for us has been there's kind of this separation of concerns. I think somebody spoke about this briefly of GTK is being disconnected a little bit from GNOME as far as user interface patterns and widgets, which for elementary is really nice because while some of our patterns are similar to GNOME, they're not the same. Right. So, we're able to use Granite as our user interface guideline library, and then we can use libadwaita for some of the more utility stuff like multi-touch, but we don't the default dialogues, for example, in GTK aren't doing a GNOME style dialogue buttons. You just have to define as an app or as your own library, you have to define how those dialogues look. So for us, it's going to mean actually more consistency for our own apps, and also just less, like I said, we're deprecating stuff from Granite because we don't have to do as much overwriting kind of.
Yeah.
Trying to think of specifically for this release cycle, what else? There's been, the little things like GTK4 lets you have rounded bottom corners on Windows really easily, which is one of those really small details that I'm all about because it just looks nice. Having everybody have hard, sharp, square corners doesn't really fit in with our visual style.
Right.
Yeah, there's just lots of, it's all on the GTK side for us, but we're really happy with what's happening for GTK4.
Oh, Ken's here.
Hey, Ken.
Great question. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So how different will core GTK3 apps look from core GTK4 apps? Have we been able to minimize the visual delta? Yes. So for us, GTK3 to 4 is much closer to a GTK3 point release change as far as updating the style sheet to support a new version of GTK than say GTK2 to GTK3 was throw everything away and start over. So for us, there's very, very little of a visual delta. I don't think you could tell whether an app is using GTK3 or GTK4 on elementary OS, which in our eyes, that's a success.
Totally.
So that's that's really nice because it means that elementary OS is all about consistency, right? But we also are practical. We know that not every single app is going to make that port in one cycle. So we didn't have to start over. with like for GTK3, we had to start over with a whole new style sheet from our old GTK2 style. With GTK4, it's just a continuation of the GTK3 style sheet. So there's very small changes. It's mostly about API changes than visual changes for us. So look and feel wise, it looks almost identical. There's some new things that are nice that you can do, like the way that focus, when you focus like a button or an entry, we're able to do more like nice things technically there. So focused entries will look a little bit better on GTK4 apps than GTK3, but we're not like revamping the style completely. And there's nothing in GTK itself that requires that you completely revamp the style. It's just that at the same time, Adwaita chose to say, hey, this is an opportunity to have like a fresh, flatter visual style. And so, yeah, it's kind of weird. We're in an interesting position there where our GTK3 and GTK4 stuff is going to look almost indistinguishable, whereas Gnome's GTK3 versus GTK4 stuff looks very different.
Yeah. So you said earlier that you had like one style sheet per app, right? Or did I get that right?
It's per accent color.
Oh, per accent color.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So you didn't have to update like a ton of style sheets then.
Right. So there are some cases in apps where as you're porting an app from GTK3 to GTK4, you have to do some technical changes, like there's deprecations and whatever.
Sure.
But there are ways, like if you're using custom CSS in your app, then you may have to like change that custom CSS to work with GTK4.
Right.
But that's kind of expected. Like that's anytime you're porting from
Sure.
an old version to a new version. So it's not substantial. It's most of that work is handled by the system style sheet that we provide. So most of the time with developers, it's like if something looks wrong in your app, complain to us because it's probably our style sheet's fault and we can fix it in our style sheet in most cases.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ubuntu kind of does that too. Like we try and communicate to the users, like if you find a bug in a package from Ubuntu, please tell us about it. And then we can direct it where it needs to go to try and minimize like spam for GNOME developers that don't care about the accent color. And we certainly don't want to break things. So we want to be good citizens. So I'm very excited about all the libadwaita stuff that's coming and how that can, it's always great to have like a shared base, shared library system. So you don't have to like copy paste code and change little bits and then things get broken everywhere. Let's see.
Heather, do you mind me asking a question real quick?
No, please go ahead.
So we're talking a lot about theming, a lot of changes from GTK3 to GTK4, lots of changes needed to Yaru and to the elementary styles. For the people here that maybe aren't aware of really what the big push for GTK4 is in general, Cassidy or Paul, maybe one of you can explain what are the benefits of GTK4? Why is it worth it? Why are we going to all this expense?
Yeah, I definitely, from what I've heard from the people doing the more of the actual technical work, so this is a little bit secondhand, but I did ask them to give me a little bit of background. But basically, a big thing is like hardware acceleration for animations. So that's exciting as we look at platforms like Pinebook Pro and Raspberry Pi. GTK3 for us was, like I said, it was software accelerated, and GTK4 can be hardware accelerated, which just means like better performance and lower power usage. So that's really exciting just to like, it's a very under the hood change that you don't really like necessarily see or experience, especially on powerful hardware. But it should mean things like better battery life when you're using those apps, and then can run on lower end hardware as well. So that's really exciting to me. There's also just like developer ease of writing apps. There were some kind of weird implementation details with GTK3 that have been rethought a bit with GTK4. There are things like everything was considered a window in GTK3. So like when you write your style sheet, you had to like be really specific about what types of windows you were talking about. Whereas in GTK4, they're using, I forget what the technical word is, but they're using, it's not a style class, but it's just like an element name They're using that in better ways as far as we're concerned, as like using in writing the style sheet. So there's just like, it's a good cleanup for us, I guess, both on the elementary side and for then our community of app developers. It's easier to do interesting things. There's also like new widgets that are, new widgets are always good, but there's like photo and video widgets are really nice. So you don't have to dive deep into like the technicalities of GStreamer as often to just like play a video in your app. Like playing a video in your app used to be this very complicated thing, and you had to like manually do the player UI and like all this stuff. And now that's just like, there's a video element. You just like point it at a video. So there's new widgets like that are good. It's easier to do, like I said, like the bottom rounded corners. It's easier to do animations and transitions, which is really cool. It's something, I feel like all of us who have used mobile platforms have been spoiled by apps that can do 3D transforms and stuff. Like, it can get over the top, but like even just a subtle 3D shift was hard to do in GTK3, and now it's really easy to do in GTK4. So that's another nice thing too.
Yeah, that's cool. Sorry, Britt, did you have more?
Oh, just one of my favorite things. This was years ago, before GTK4 was released. Christian and I were just sitting, and he was showing that he had just landed like real-time scrolling improvements. And he showed like GTK3 scrolling through like a giant block of code. And I looked at it, I was like, yeah, that's fine. And then he showed it in GTK4, and it was like buttery smooth. I was like, wow.
Especially on like high frame rate displays. So that's another place where that hardware acceleration comes in, is like high frame rate. So, a lot of displays run at 60 frames or 60 hertz. But we're getting more and more devices running at 90 or 120 or 144, et cetera. And so that means every single frame of that animation has to be multiple times faster to be able to be smooth and not be jittery. So that's where your hardware acceleration comes in, and you're doing that processing on the GPU, which is really good at processing graphics, instead of doing it on the CPU, which is not really made for that kind of work. So yeah, there's the smoothness and everything. There's been a big focus on performance and like frame rates and animations. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly the animations. Yeah. It's really nice. It's really nice to be delivering that and shipping it. I do want to like kind of go back a little bit, and we were talking about colors, accents, and Pretzel Park made a great point here. Some people want the theme of the app as it was delivered. So I mean, some people want that, and some people want a more like unified look to their desktop. I mean, how do we move forward in providing like that kind of configuration level setting for users? Because some people want the Gnome blue on the Ubuntu, that's how the app was. That's what they want, and that's okay. How do we enable those folks to do that? Paul, do you have any thoughts?
It could be nice to have just like elementary color picker with different accent colors. Actually, we can't except doing like elementary, we can't use anything another color than orange.
Yeah, that's maybe with. Well, I don't know. I don't know if the new API.
I think maybe they will add a way to add users' preferred accent color, and then we'll be able to have apps with users' accent color. But actually, we can't.
I think it would be kind of cool if there was like a configurable option in settings that was like,
yes,
theme it for me or don't. I don't know. Maybe that's easier said than done. I don't know. What do you think, Cassidy? Like, how would you, if someone comes to you and says, I love elementary, but I do want some of my apps to be like this other color.
Yeah, so there's so many layers to this question. I don't want to get super into the weeds, but like, so on the one side of the spectrum, it's like, it's all open source. You own your desktop. You can do whatever the heck you want, like it's yours. So if you want to patch the style sheet out from under apps and swap it all out, like you can do that, and you'll always be able to do that because it's all open source, right? But on the other side of the spectrum, it's like you have users who are using apps that are like Electron apps like Slack or Spotify, for example. And it's like, we don't really expect to be able to like change the looks of those apps because those apps are just designed and work the way those apps are designed to look and work. So like you have these kind of two very, very opposite ends of the spectrum. And so on the elementary side, we say, yeah, it's up to the app developer to decide how their app looks and works. Again, knowing that underneath it all, it's all open source on elementary OS, and you can always change it. But like the default experience is going to be whatever the developer wants. The developer can choose to support system-wide accent colors, and that is the default. But they can also say, no, we always want our app to have Spotify green as the accent color. And then again, if you go and edit the source code or whatever under the hood, you could change that if you want. But it's like you have almost this push-pull of like app developers are in pretty much ultimate control of what they deliver because it's their app. But it's running on your system that's all open source, so you can also do whatever you want. So on elementary OS, we don't really expose the nitty-gritty. Like we don't expose a way to completely swap out your entire style sheet, because that can break features like accent colors and dark style. So like we don't want users to experience that breakage out of the box, but they can dig into the terminal and change a setting and keep the pieces if they want to.
Yeah. I mean, if a user is going to change the CSFs on an app, they are in unsupported territory, and that might break some things. Yeah. So, but it's also kind of unfortunate that we have to say, well, if you want the default color that app came with, you're just going to have to fork it and change it and maintain it yourself. Like,
right.
Yeah, it's open source, but that's pretty high bar.
That's where we're trying to find a middle ground of like, so again, on elementary OS, we have system-wide accent colors where the default experience is if your favorite color is red. If I showed you my desktop right now, like I have a very red background and my accent color set to red. And because I like red, that's my favorite color. So by default, all your apps will adopt that and whatever. But like if an app really doesn't want to, again, they could have written in Electron and made it totally not use GTK in the first place. So it's cool that it's using GTK, but it might not support that accent color. But then as we work on these, as Gnome upstream is working on like a recoloring API, those are some of the like push and pull problems that they're trying to solve too, is who's in ultimate control there. Should there be an option to say, no, always overwrite it as a user? Should that option be exposed? And that might be different per OS or per platform, depending on what you want to actually expose. So
it could be put into like tweaks or something. I mean,
right. Yeah. Depending on what the API itself supports, it's like, maybe you have a way that says no. I mean, I'm like thinking through the technical implementation on elements of like, we could have a style sheet that always uses the red accent color that doesn't support per app recoloring. Like theoretically, that's a thing we could build. So theoretically, we could have a switch in the settings that says force this accent color. So like it just depends on what kind of experience you want to deliver.
Yeah. I think that's a good point.
It does lead to a pretty interesting philosophy. So kind of the tradition of the Linux desktop has been that the user has full control over anything they want. They can change every button, widget, color that they could possibly want. And that, I think a lot of people grew up with Linux having that be the norm.
Yeah.
As Linux is moving more mainstream, we have to think about things like brand identity and making sure that developer time is well appreciated. And one of the arguments coming from the side of let's take away a bit of the agency from the user and put it in the hands of the developer is that developers don't have the possible, they can't possibly fix every possible theme and every possible tweak that could ever happen to their app. They can develop for maybe 1 or 2 styles, and that's it. And then you have, from my perspective, like the big first parties, like trying to get Microsoft Office or Adobe. If Adobe knew that their brand and their styles could just be like swapped out from underneath their app on the fly, they would never, from my perspective, take us seriously as a platform. So how the question is like, how do we adhere to the traditions and values that made Linux what it is, putting lots of control in the hands of the user, but also have a competitive platform that also respects brand identity and the developer's time. Does that make sense? It's a big question.
I think the answer is lots of documentation, lots of good, discoverable, coherent documentation. I think there was already like a documentation problem with Adwaita, and I was looking at like some of the recent commits. There's been a lot of like docs improvements recently. So that's cool. But yeah, like you're right. You're absolutely right, Britt. Like if we want to compete with other platforms and be taken seriously, then we have to consider some of those finer user experience points. But also, in addition to what Windows and Mac OS does, we want it to be configurable for the developer as well. So it's like we're already starting at a disadvantage and taking on double work.
Yeah, I think that's where defining those points of customization is really important. So like traditionally on GTK desktops, it's like you either don't change the style sheet at all, or you completely rip out the entire style sheet and replace it with a whole different one. Which, like, if you're familiar with like how web development works, like that idea is kind of crazy. Like you're like, I'm going to this website and I'm going to just like take their whole style sheet away and I'm going to put my own one in on it. Like that's pretty weird, but that's kind of what our desktop has supported for years or decades at this point. So a kind of a middle ground that we're like the recoloring API and like what Elementary does with the accent color is trying to define what that customization point is, so we can say, yeah, the user's still in control, but like the control is well defined. You're not ripping out the entire style sheet and breaking things you don't even know you're breaking, but you're saying I'm changing the accent color, or I'm changing this aspect. The light style versus dark style is another example of that. Like traditionally, you would just rip out the whole style sheet and put a dark style sheet on, but then that means you end up with dark icons on dark backgrounds and things. Whereas now we're saying, okay, there's a way to express, the user can express, I want a dark style, and now apps can use that and do smart things with that. And so it's well defined instead of just ripping it all out. So I think that's like, it's harder work than other platforms, I think, because we have to be intentional about defining those points of customization and preference. But I think if we can figure it out, it does make our platform better.
Absolutely. And I personally think that it would make it even stronger for like a phone case. So I know you said Elementary is not made for mobile apps, so you don't want to use libhandy, but I think you should say yet, because I can't wait to have like an Elementary phone.
Yeah, and there's always ways, even if we don't have plans right now to make an Elementary OS on mobile, like that doesn't mean some of our apps couldn't run on mobile.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I totally agree. So I think it's, kind of defining what is that like base middle ground from which we can build on like as we grow, because if we gave the user all the configurability, then, it would be supported without use. So it's always easier to add than it is to remove support as you go. Right. And I think Pretzel Park made a good point that like if there was really a custom color change, if that was in high demand, we would have seen it. I think the demand that we see is really more around like accent colors and styles for like distribution wide, just for that consistent feel, so you can look at a desktop and say like, oh yeah, that's Elementary, or that's Ubuntu, or that's Pop. I think it makes a lot of sense for upstreams and downstreams to play nicely and work well together, because we're all trying to get the market share of people into open source, right? That's our goal. Right.
It's that cooperation that I always talk about. It's
Cooperation.
we're cooperating on the core pieces, but we're competing because we think we can build the best thing, and I think that's a healthy ecosystem, like cooperation.
Cooperation. I like that. Yeah. We should use that at the next Linux App Summit. Cooperation. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Britt, do you have any questions?
Yeah. So, elementary, kind of, if I can goad on you a little bit. Early on, you guys were one of the first major distros, from my recollection, that allowed for like changing accent styles, like user selectable accent styles. That's fantastic. Good on you. Have you seen from your experience that that alone is enough to satiate kind of the users want to customize their desktop and make it their own? Or because you guys don't really you don't have any toggle to just like allow people to just like sideload their own themes in, so like
Right. Yeah.
what
So
you
again,
give them
under the
has to
hood,
be it.
can. But that's like, no, that was a big push for why we did accent colors. It was actually, it kind of grew out of some of the initiative for dark style as well, of like, it's yet another way for people to make their experience feel like their own. And I would say on the elementary side, it has like, it's been extremely well received by our community. And like the amount of screenshots I see shared in elementary communities with other style sheets or other themes has like plummeted, which is like really cool. Like there's still the people who just, tweak everything, and that's fine. But like, it's cool to see. I see people with the dark style quite a bit, and I see people with like the dark style combined with another accent color, because it really does completely change the look of the desktop. And like, maybe that's all they wanted. They're like, I just don't want the default. I want it to look unique and cool or whatever. Or maybe they were switching out the whole style sheet because they preferred a dark style. And so I would say, yeah, within the elementary community, it absolutely has like served a huge part of that need. Of course, it doesn't serve 100%, but it's like maybe 80%, and that's a big deal for us. So I think in our case, it has been a huge benefit there. And again, especially with the dark style, like if you look at a screenshot of elementary OS with like a really cool red wallpaper and the dark style and a red accent color versus a really like bright yellow wallpaper and the light style and a light accent color. Like they look like almost like two different OSs at a glance. But then you're like, oh, okay, they still both feel and look like elementary OS. They're just very visually distinct.
Yeah, and Ken makes a good point that like it's really nice when the apps look like they're part of the distro. And yeah, how do we do that with core apps in an easily, cooperative way? Yeah.
Yeah, that's something, a distinction between what is a core app versus what is a third-party app has been one that's been very hard to pin down for a long time, because when you have a distro that's just built on packages, a package is a package is a package. There's not a whole lot of difference. Cassidy and also Paul, from your guys' perspective, how do you think going into the future, let's think 5 years, 10 years down the road, how do you think the Linux ecosystem is going to look? Are we going to have hard lines between like the calculator app versus Spotify?
I mean, I think we already do to an extent. Again, thanks. I don't know if thanks is the right word, to things like Electron, where users are using apps that just do whatever the app wants to do today. And no, like I think that core versus community or core versus third party or first party versus third party distinction is important. On elementary OS, that line is very clear for us, because it's everything that comes with the OS is core, and everything in App Center is third party. We also enforce that the curated apps in App Center do some things to use, like they all use GTK and they support accessibility features and things. So there's that nice thing there. But like if an app as long as it's actually using GTK, it can use whatever accent color it wants if it's completely custom or whatever. And then users do expect like Spotify running in Electron to do whatever it wants there. So like, yeah, I think there's going to be a pretty clear distinction between apps can do what they want, and it's kind of always been that way though too. Like GIMP, I know technically it's, you know, it's a GTK app, but like even I think in the GTK2 days it didn't really use like the system style. It used its own like visual style.
Well, but
It's
GIMP
a
is
mixture.
GIMP is special because that's like the reason GTK came about.
But I'm saying like, yeah, okay. But like that, it wasn't like that was like, oh, this is like unheard of and like unacceptable. It was like, yeah, it did its own thing, and there were apps that always kind of just did their own thing. I think we will see more of that going forward. I think we'll see more apps that just hard code a style sheet and just look however they want. And you know, if users don't accept that, the users won't use that app as much, and they'll push back on it. And I
So you think there's like a natural like settling there that will just kind of happen?
I think so. I think, you know, on platforms like Elementary OS, I think our third-party apps will probably, because there's a tradition of this, like they'll probably look and feel a lot like the other elementary apps. But I think if you go to FlatHub and just download a random app, or you go to the Snap Store and download a random app, I don't really see that app integrating totally perfectly with every single desktop ever, because that just isn't what developers are used to. I guess from other platforms even, you know, and that there's good and bad things about that. Like, I think it can be good that developers can have the final say on exactly how their app looks and works, but we also have this rich tradition of third-party apps all sort of integrating and looking the same on our Linux distributions. So,
right. Well, since you know, I think that's all good. I hope everything kind of settles into like a nice place in like 5-10 years, you know, or less. But so if people want to contribute to be part of that 5-10 year plan, oh shoot, I clicked a link and actually just, of course, it took me there. So let's see, maybe I can paste this link into the chat here and then post it for you all to anybody that's interested in helping out with Yaru can go take a look at some instructions here. And then Cassidy, just elementary.io.
yeah, so we have, if you specifically want to get involved on working on Elementary and helping shape these things, elementary.io/get-involved, or elementary.io and click on Get Involved at the top. There you go. Yeah.
There you go. So yeah, I hope that folks have enjoyed this and have learned a little bit about theming and accent colors and where we came from, where we're going, some of the cool new things that are happening in GTK and Elementary. And I'm personally excited to see kind of how Adwaita or how GTK and Gnome kind of grow separately. Because I think that gives both technologies like their own room to work with. So yeah, so please, if you're interested, you know, get involved, talk to these folks. They're very nice people. And then yeah, like just I think some quick announcements. We have a wallpaper contest coming up. Britt, do you have the details on that?
I sure do. So starting today, as in now, the Ubuntu wallpaper contest is open for our 2204 release, which is the next LTS release. So this is the big deal. These wallpapers are going to stick around for 10 years. So if you'd like to get at least 10 years. So if you'd like to get your wallpaper into the next Ubuntu release, the details will be posted. The details are posted already in the chat stream. You can go to our discourse and find that out, but it starts today and it closes on March 3rd. No, sorry, it closes on February 25th. And starting on February 25th, the voting will open, which will extend all the way to March 3rd. The top 2 wallpapers that are picked will go into the image, and the top 10 will get highlights. So if you would love to see your work put into the next Ubuntu release. Get to it.
Okay, here's the link. Jammy jellyfish. What kind of jam, I wonder? Yeah, so I look forward to seeing what everybody submits. I think we had quite a bit for the last wallpaper competition. It was like 180 or something like that. It was large. So I can't wait to see what we get for the LTS. Yeah, I'm really excited to see some Blender pictures. Yeah, so thanks to everyone for coming, and I really appreciate everyone's input. I appreciate the Gnome Foundation and everybody that has written blog posts and contributed to the constructive discussion around how do we solve this problem for upstream in distros to make everybody happy. I think that's great. I think we're going in a positive direction, and it's just going to be more inclusive going forward. Yeah, and that's what we want to see. Is we want to see not broken apps, and like at all. Jordan, we don't want broken apps either, so we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So yeah, glad to have you all. Thanks again. The next Indaba will be the last Friday of February, which is February 25th. Great. So that's cool. That's the day before I travel for our first sprint in the pandemic. So that'll be interesting.
Cassidy
yeah.
and Paul, is there any closing remarks? Anything coming up that you want the community to know about?
Oh man. I mean, I always like to plug our blog, so blog.elementary.io, because that's where you'll learn about what we're working on and what's coming up. But yeah, off the top of my head, there's we'll have our monthly blog post talking about Elementary OS 7, and we've officially shifted development starting on that. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the GTK stuff and what's coming in OS 7. So look out for that soon.
And Paul, when can we? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, what about you, Paul?
Well, we are trying to create a Yaru Flutter. I don't know if I should say this like that. But, most of our works is done with on this part. We are moving very fast. So if you want to contribute, I should have a link.
Is this a link to how to get involved with Yaru?
Yaru Dart.
Oh, okie dokie. Here, I'll copy and paste this. There it is. That's
Yes,
cool.
we're trying to do to add the Yaru style to Flutter, and we have many contributions here.
All right, great. Well, I can't wait to see what happens with Yaru and Flutter and Elementary and all the things. So
there's also icons.
Icons, new icons.
Yaru icons point dot.
That's awesome. Very excited for that. But I think we're out of time, so we're going to say goodbye to everybody, and we'll see you Friday. Thanks so much, Paul, Cassidy, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Always great to see you guys. So, yeah, see everybody February 25th for a TD
Goodbye.
theme. Okay, bye.